Rams. I'm the chaplain and director of spiritual life at Warren Wilson College, and welcome home. Hear these words of welcome from Rebecca Casey. This is a brief and shining moment. As time keeps passing on, let's let time stop, if only for a moment, and be here with each other with no separation, feeling our grief fully and together. Friends, we gather today to celebrate the life of John Casey and also to honor our shared grief, for we will surely miss him. Celtic poet John O'Donohue charges us, let us not look for you only in memory, where we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows, and music echoes eternal tones. Those words have surely been lingering around me for the last week. And so we named the complex tangle of beautiful stuff we bring with us this day. Celebration and grief, absence and presence, separation and togetherness. And we gather in this space, a chapel whose architecture and imagery arises out of the founding Presbyterian tradition of the college. A college that John was deeply loyal to, and deeply loyal to its traditions. In their early years on campus, the Caseys befriended Fred and Bev Oler, who bore witness to the spirit of welcome and hospitality that animates this place and is still central to the congregation who worships here regularly. It's also been the site of countless assemblies, award ceremonies, and community gatherings, so Rebecca thought this should be the place we gather. Yet, as Presbyterian theologian and teacher Frederick Buechner reminds us, of all powers, love is the most powerful and most powerless. It's the most powerful because it alone can conquer that final and most impregnable stronghold, which is the human heart. It is the most powerless because it can do nothing except by consent. So with your consent, let us proceed with love. And know this, you all are welcome here, and all of you is welcome here. It's been a daunting task to set the space for the service of remembering John Casey, and remembering is what we are about, coming back together with a singleness of purpose, across lines of worldview and belief, and for some of us across lines of old conflicts and wounds. The kinds of things that happen when we stumble through life and community together. When our institutions sometimes miss the mark of living fully into who we hope we could be. And yet, even in, or maybe particularly in, his dying, John Casey invites us to come together. Like many who have come to Warren Wilson community in recent years, I first came to know Casey as the long-haired, leather-vested parliamentarian that seemed to be the only one who could keep Robert's Rules of Order straight as we were leading into new government structures. I hear a second in that motion. But through shared students and a handful of meaningful conversations, some in the last week and a half of his life, I came to glimpse his beautiful wisdom. I felt respected by Casey. A true gift for a philosopher to offer a theologian. I felt smarter when I was around him, and I admit that upon receiving his approval, I came to realize that I wanted it far more than I had realized, or maybe even want to admit. He was a powerful presence, cantankerous and kind, compassionate and compelling. So tasked with the work of honoring his worldview as I stand in this role as college chaplain, I was trying to dig into both the Taoist and Lakota traditions to speak to who he was and what he believed. Thankfully, a few days ago, as I sat in his office with Rebecca and Colin Hansen, they offered me an essay entitled Nature Way, an essay he wrote in preparation for a class back in 2000. So rather than stumble through my own interpretations of his worldview, let's instead let Casey's words speak for themselves. So this is from Nature Way, excerpts of Nature's Way. I'm a philosopher. I do it for a living, but I also do it for a life. I began my career focused on whether there is a reality out there and the truth is about it, or just my self-generated thoughts in here and no truth. These abstract speculations have been constantly decreasing interest to me over the years. My interest has been decreased in proportion to my realization that my speculations were rendered pointless by my fundamental picture of reality. My picture of me locked in the cave of my mind with reality and truth out there creates a gulf that cannot be bridged. Since mainstream Western speculation about truth shares this mind cave picture, it's no wonder that its history is that of a bunch of guys repeatedly butting their heads against their own assumptions, like maniacs trying to get out of a padded cell. I've had another reason to devote more effort to concrete problems. Whether in here or out there, the world of my experience has some really ugly aspects. We humans do ugly things to each other and equally ugly things to the animals, plants, and rocks around us. So I have to wonder why we act as we do, especially since we seem increasingly aware of the consequences of our actions. Why do apparently rational creatures continue to foul their own nest and destroy each other? My answer was revealed to me by my speculations about truth. We act as we do because of our picture of reality. Each of us has, at some level of consciousness, a picture of reality, a set of paradigms which govern our understanding of our own experience and the ways we think about that experience. The way we believe the world must be fundamentally determines the form and filters the content of our experience. Believing is seeing. Our worldview, our picture of the framework of reality, also governs the sort of relationships we allow between the constituents of our reality and the categories of existence, the sort of things we allow to exist in our world. Some alternative views suggest that I just need to be one with all that is. If this is another formula for feeling good about inaction, I reject it. But if this is the beginning of a new picture of reality, which recognizes relationships besides cause and effect, which insists that we cannot escape our connection to all that is, and that the suffering of others is our own, then this picture holds some hope as a source of a whole new way of behaving in the world. Unfortunately, oneness is just an abstract idea for most of us. What does oneness look like? It does not really help to draw a circle or a web of life. These are just more abstractions. What is the concrete picture? And why should I suppose that it is the picture in accord with which I should live? These are important questions. We need to find a concrete picture of a world that works, that guides its adherents to act in beautiful ways, and good reason to believe that it will work for us and our world. There's one view which I believe so elegantly and simply fulfills these needs that it has become for me the standard against which all other views are measured: philosophical Taoism. Philosophical views are often used to launch importantly different religious views which bear the same name. It is philosophical Taoism, as offered in the Tao Te Ching, that is my exemplar. The most straightforward character-for-character rendering of the title of this work is Nature Way. That is basically all there is to philosophical Taoism. The concrete picture of a world that works is nature without our corruption of it. The guidance for our actions this picture provides us is to do what non-human nature does: follow the nature way. What recommends the picture and the way to us. What shows that it could work for us is that it once did. It is not some foreign picture imposed on our world. It is our world working right again. The view even suggests the way to return to that beautiful world. Do nothing. We screwed it up so much by doing, by forcing nature to provide only for us, just as we expect machines to. We thought we would be better off for it. Perhaps we know better now. We regain our beautiful world by resuming our place in it, by being the nature way. Another concrete problem has long bothered me. Being fully present in nature has given me new paradigms to govern my behavior. I've learned the value of humility, for example, by noting the power water gains by seeking the low places, as the Tao Te Ching says I may. And though I have not yet practiced it much, I can imagine what being humble would look like in my life. However, most of what I have learned about fitting into the balance of nature is much harder to imagine as a life. How does one live lightly on the land right here in the Shenandoah Valley? How much is enough? Taoism has proven too minimalist for some. For Taoists, nature is sacred in the fundamental sense of being worthy of veneration. But philosophical Taoism is not a spiritual view. It has only one category of existence, the category that contains water, rocks, plants, and animals, the one we call physical. Taoism is a oneness view, so it has no room for another category of existence, such as the one we call spiritual, either as a realm separate from nature or as a separate part of nature. As I understand them, the religions imported into this country identify the sacred with spirit. Something is worthy of veneration if and because it is spirit and was created by spirit, or has spirit in it. Many of those who make this identification and also want to recognize nature as sacred have hit upon Native North Americans as their model. As they understand it, nature is held sacred with Native North American spirituality. Their Native North Americans believe in a great spirit who watches over nature with the help of lesser spirits associated with natural events like thunder spirits. There are lesser yet spirits, which are like the souls of plants and animals, and lowest spirits stuck in human bodies. The reason this spirituality is so appealing as a worldview should be obvious. It's a close match for the hierarchy of spirits found in Judaism and Christianity. The reason it is appealing as an alternative to the traditional Jewish and Christian worldview is that it moves humans out of the center of nature. This view is also appealing because there is reason to believe it will work. Native North Americans are thought to have fit quite well into their natural setting, at least until European invaders messed things up. I know a lot about the day-to-day lives of Native North Americans, so their lives might provide some concrete guidance for ours. This is an appealing suggestion, but it's deeply flawed. The Native North American is a fiction. If you came across a land bridge onto the northern part of this continent, you are native only because you preceded Europeans. North, South, and America are words only on invaders' maps, lumping together the ideas of all the Indians in the area, now demarcated as North America, and thinking that it will yield an intelligible single view is dominator thinking too. It rests on an assumption that Indians are too limited in their thinking, too primitive to have evolved the diversity of thought evidenced among Europeans. There's only one hope for avoiding these mistakes, and yet having a chance to learn from people who did once live the nature way. Pick a single tribe, learn their language, and translate the earliest original sources available. Attempt an empathic understanding of what you read, with a conscious effort to identify your own assumptions and the effect they are having on your understanding. Get some first-hand experience of what life was like before extensive contact with Europeans. Do ceremony. Have Indian friends or relatives who are sympathetic to your quest. That has been my path. I entered upon it because of a personal connection to the Lakota and Western Cherokee, but I've recently magnified my efforts for philosophical reasons. I began experientially. I used the methods I learned from Indians to periodically live exclusively off the land. I found a Lakota medicine man to guide me in a vision quest, but out of fear ignored the implications of my vision. I did some ceremony off and on. When new information about the Lakota became available, I read it. I also read what I could about Taoism. I have meditated every day for years, and I think of myself as struggling to be natural. But somehow, what I learned from Lakota and Taoist was on different tracks in my mind until I first taught alternative philosophies. As illustration of a point in Taoism, I found myself telling a Lakota story. The potential connection should have been obvious all along. Perhaps this is just an excuse, but I think the connection was obscured by the people I had read who wanted the Lakota to be native North Americans with a spirit-based view. Suddenly in class, I saw Taoism as the model for a different interpretation of what I had learned about Lakota thought. I realized I had to free my understanding from the influence of missionary translators, so I learned both the everyday and sacred Lakota languages. I rounded up original sources and began translating them anew. I overcame my fear of what it meant to have lightning and crows in my vision, and so I had them tattooed on my body. I began to take seriously my sacred responsibilities to nature and as a contrary. Ceremony became as important a part of my life as meditation, and I found ways to more intimately involve nature in the events of my days. I still have much to learn, but I do have a better life, a better understanding of my place in nature, and the basis for a new understanding of ancient Lakota thought, and some good evidence to support it. I think that the interesting question is whether religions, sciences, and the more liberal arts can be revised to give nature its proper place in them and return humans to their proper place in nature. I sure hope so. The prospect of everyone having to accept a complete paradigm change is daunting. That some of us might do so and put pressure on the mainstream is already happening. I admit that it is the revisionists who change the world, but it is the revolutionaries who force that change. As the final assignment for this course, you'll be asked to write a paper something like this one, in which you describe the path that has led you to your current understanding of nature and your place in it. I hope that where you are in your thinking at the end of this course is not where I am at the beginning of it. I hope that I am not still here either. I hope that we can both move much further along our paths. I hope that we can help one another, although in truth, we each have to recreate ourselves.
Almost all of my memories of John include the proximity of at least two of these three objects. A black leather vest, its back discolored yellow from the leaning against chalkboards during his lectures. A mug, most often a white one, with a featureless crow stretched across its front and filled with black tea. And a pocket-sized copy of Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Tao Te Ching. These objects became relics of a sort. Students in his classes would speculate about which mug he would bring to class this time, and were often somewhat disturbed when his vest was not worn. My own memories, however, were of excitement when he would pull this tiny book from his pocket. I knew I was going to get a healthy dose of mystic wisdom when the Tao Te Ching came out. His expertise of and deep respect for the ancient Chinese masters was obvious to both his students and his peers. Many of his students have heard him speak from the Tao Te Ching's passages for various classes and in various contexts. One particular passage, however, seems to take precedence over all others. I must have heard him recite it at least a dozen times in our shared time together. Today, I have the privilege of echoing those words, which I have heard him speak so many times, as we honor his life and celebrate his legacy. From the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. The naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. Here, Lao Tzu offers us the ancient Taoist truth that all things, which we distinguish with names, identities, and definitions, are in fact not separate. The grand illusion is that we are isolated beings, confined by our bodies and our minds, that the world we experience is distinct from ourselves. Lao Tzu and John knew better. He knew that all things are interconnected, be it an object or a being. John frequently utilized his chair example to represent this concept. Some of the students here may have recognized it. The chair, he would say, is actually a collection of billions of atoms formed into the shape of a chair, which then we label as chair. Yet, the object, like all other things in the universe, is just a collection of energetically charged microscopic particles. The thing that makes the distinction is us, not the object. In reality, our atoms and the chair's atoms are both just part of the same whole, separated only by our distinction of otherness. Knowing it as chair is seeing the manifestation. Knowing it as a bunch of atoms like mine is realizing the mystery. The same applies to ourselves. We are isolated only by our distinction of me and you. The reality as expressed by Lao Tzu is the infinite and intimate connection that we share with each other and with the source of all things. I find great comfort in this wisdom, to know that John is with us in each present moment, released from form and boundary and absorbed into the infinite. He lives on in each of us and in the world we experience together. He lives on in those relics which he's left behind and in our loving memories of him. His spirit is free of the vessel that carried him through life, and now he rests, as John would put it, in pure isness. We may not be able to speak or share space with John in the same way that we once did, but he will always be. His return to the source is not his departure from the world. It is his reabsorption into the darkness, the all-pervading energy that connects everyone and everything. From chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching. Empty your minds of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, unattached, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you. And when death comes, you are ready. I know of no one more ready to be simply be than John. May his newfound serenity never cease.
Good afternoon. I've chosen to read a poem, When Great Trees Fall, by Maya Angelou, because I believe it speaks to who John Casey was or is for so many of us. And I also believe that he would have liked this poem. When great trees fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder, lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes, briefly, see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die in our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us. They existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed.
Shortly after Casey died, a former colleague wrote to me describing Casey as the lifeblood of the college, the one person on campus who knew practically every member of the college's staff and faculty, and it seemed most of the students too. So it isn't surprising that we have this large crowd gathered today, nor is it surprising how deep a connection we all feel to Casey. In my few comments, I'm not going to claim that I can speak for all of you or express fully what you would want to say. Your connections to Casey are too varied and often different from my own. And many of you have expressed your love and appreciation for Casey online and in person in ways that are far more poignant and meaningful than anything that I could say on your behalf. Casey's importance to this campus is in part a reflection of the many roles he played. Philosopher, teacher, advisor, supervisor, dean, head of the Committee on Buildings and Grounds, forum co-convener, faculty body founder, as Brian has already mentioned, the voice of Robert's Rules of Order, crying in a wilderness of meeting chaos, gadfly, and when needed, pain in the ass, and proud of it. He was certainly all of these and more, but to me, he was mainly a great colleague and friend, and that is what I'd like to talk about today. We can think of a colleague as a co-worker, just somebody stuck in the same daily mess as we are. But a great colleague is somebody who makes that mess more bearable by being a role model, by easing the workload, by making work fun. And Casey did all of these things. For one thing, he was always here. I'm not sure when he arrived at work, but it was certainly much earlier than I. Something I'd be reminded of every morning when I'd see his big red pickup in a prime spot behind Jensen while I drove slowly on my way to eventually find a spot somewhere in the far reaches of the Kittredge lot. And he was always one of the last to leave each day. He was dedicated to his teaching and to his students. Although he taught many of his courses dozens of times, you would often still see him sitting in his office at the end of the day, Lamy fountain pen in hand, scrawling out revised notes and reworking a course. In the earlier days, I would often come to my office to work on weekends, and Casey would be there too. I'd hear him in his office whiling away the hours, quietly dictating his comments on student papers onto cassettes, which seemed so high-tech at the time, but which also allowed him to provide much more feedback than he could have otherwise. I hope some of you ex-students here still have those cassettes. I think what special mementos they would be. As a final tribute to his dedication to teaching, I'll simply point out that less than a month ago, Casey was still in the classroom. When he wasn't busy with his teaching, Casey was constantly engaged with the community, often, as Rebecca has reminded me, as an unofficial ombudsman for community members needing to get a matter addressed. People trusted him to speak on their behalf and to get things done. He never seemed to mind, and in fact, one of his great loves was college governance. I love discussing campus politics with Casey. Discuss and critique, lots of critiquing. In fact, I used to tell him that we were like the two old men in the Muppets show who sat in the balcony making cynical comments about everything that happened on stage. Yet that wasn't really true. because Casey was never one of those tiresome critics who complain constantly and see stupidity all around them. Instead, what he saw were problems that might be fixed. And more importantly, he worked harder than anybody I know do to come up with solutions. It was rare for him to miss a meeting of faculty body or staff forum and later forum. It is hard to imagine one of those meetings without also seeing Casey slowly raising his hand and then starting out, "I've been thinking," or "I find myself wondering." Never directly addressing an issue, but coming at it sideways, not usually with a lot of emotion, more with deep consideration. He had a great trust in small-scale democracy, even though that meant, and this, by the way, is one of the valuable lessons that I learned from him, it meant that when the vote comes, you sometimes lose. If you work in a democracy, you better learn to accept defeat. But that didn't really matter because winning or losing wasn't as important to Casey as making sure that an issue that needed airing got discussed. Largely because of Casey's presence, the faculty members on the 3rd floor of Jensen, where his office was located, got a reputation of being a troublesome lot. I've been in numerous meetings where complaints from the faculty were simply countered with, "Oh, that's just 3rd floor Jensen," meaning Casey. In truth, 3rd floor Jensen was a special place because of Casey's presence. But if you ask those of us with offices there how he made the place special, it wouldn't be because he created a hotbed of campus unrest. I think we'd all agree, and this extends to all of you who work with Casey, it was because Casey made work fun. How did he do this? He was the campus raconteur, a term much fancier than anything Casey would have used, but a term that captures more fully Casey's special skill than the simple storyteller. A raconteur is a particularly skillful, adept, amusing, and never-ending teller of anecdotes. It is a raconteur is to a storyteller what chocolate mousse is to chocolate pudding, what a good Burgundy is to cheap Lambrusco, what Pisco Pale is to Budweiser. That was Casey. As many of my colleagues can attest, whenever a conversation started in one of the office doorways, within minutes, Casey was there. And a few minutes later, you would be lost in one of his tales, maybe related to what you had been talking about, and maybe not. A tale that took you off to another place in time. You never knew where you would end up, but it was often someplace on the Great Plains with stories of grain elevators or of changing schools every 2 or 3 months, or even, don't ask me to explain, Naugahyde houses. Or it might be a tale of teaching in Ames, Iowa, or being a woodworker in the Midwest, or a protest in Chicago. You might learn, apropos to who knows what, that Casey was responsible for painting the water tower in tiny Downs, Illinois. Something that thrills me every time I see it while driving down Interstate 74 on the way to visit my mother in Wisconsin. I should add, because I heard so many of Casey's stories over and over, that long before it suddenly became fashionable, Casey was a real fan of alternative facts. But unlike the current penchant to use them as cover-up for lying, Casey used them to keep stories fresh and relevant. Stories that all of us had learned to take with a grain of salt, but to enjoy precisely because they were often as much tall tale as true. For all these reasons, Casey was a wonderful colleague, the kind of person you wanted to work with. But it wasn't just his hard work, his community activism, or even Casey, the raconteur, that made him such a special presence. It was the interest he took in us as individuals and how he cared about us, not just as colleagues, but as friends. He wanted to know about our families. He wanted to hear our stories too. He took joy when we brought our children into work. I think of the twinkle in his eye when he talked to Angela or Erin or Melissa's daughters. Casey and I shared our love for the Great Plains, where both of us were born, and we also had in common the experience of getting our PhDs at the University of Iowa. That shared background made him a trusted advisor. I remember he even advised me on what to get my mother for her 92nd birthday. Both our mothers lived long parts of their lives in Iowa, and Casey suggested that I get my mom what he had earlier bought for his own mother, a subscription to Our Iowa magazine. Motto, the magazine that celebrates all that's great about living in Iowa. My mother loved it. But what I remember perhaps more fondly than the storytelling or the gift advice were the late Friday afternoon conversations when I'd be clearing my desk before the weekend, and Casey, as usual, was working late. We were often the last two left on the hallway, and especially during my first few years at the college, when I felt doubts about my work or troubled about students or other colleagues, Casey would offer encouragement and quiet support. Not in specific ways, and never naming names or even pretending to know what was really going on, but just enough to let me know that he had noticed and that I wasn't alone with my doubts and worries. Over time then, we became more than colleagues. We became friends, close friends. And during Casey's last week, we felt deeply that friendship and the sadness that it would end. One of the things that I really appreciated, and I know many of you appreciated as well, was that Casey told us it was okay to be sad. And so last week I sat with him and held his hand and told him how sad it was to lose such a good friend. And he told me he was sad too, but he also quietly let me know that the friendship would still be there. And then we said goodbye. And now I wait like the rest of you for the sadness to fade. It is good to be here with all of you today. Your presence helps to heal the ache of sadness for me, and I hope it does the same for you. We are all lucky to have had such a good teacher, colleague, brother, and friend. And I know that our memories of this wonderful man and the joy he brought us will eventually be stronger than the pain we feel today.
Friends, those of you who are the praying sort, I invite you to join me in this prayer, and those of you who aren't, I invite you to hear these words. Written by my predecessor and Casey's friend, Fred Oler, who once stood here in this pulpit. Let us pray. Beautiful God, how good it is that we have seen in the midst of all the gray and banal and sad stuff of life, a person really caring about truth. We have seen something so beautiful it took our boredom away. Quiet courage in a timid person, a man who could laugh at himself, a genuinely humble person who did not know he was humble. Real indignation that was better than self-righteousness or silence. We have seen love in other people and even in ourselves. Breathe on that glow, that it may not die, but burn more brightly, clearly. Amen. So friends, I know that there will be time in the reception following this to share stories and memories, but for now, I invite those of you who wish to speak a single word or phrase that reflects who you knew John Casey to be. Just a word or phrase from where you're seated. Anyone may begin.
Intriguing. Mentor.
Playful.
Wise. Master gardener.
Stimulating, honest,
Deeply connected.
Thoughtful neighbor.
gentle, voracious, naked, Young.
Articulate.
Kind.
For all of this we give thanks. Rebecca asked that I share these words with you, this wisdom gleaned from Casey's last days. These are in Rebecca's words. Here's the message I want to deliver. I thanked him for all he'd done for me. His immediate response was to thank me for all I'd done for him. We held hands. Then I asked for his forgiveness for all the times I'd said mean things and didn't value him the way he deserved to be. His immediate response was to ask my forgiveness for all his shortcomings. So my message is this. Thank you all for surrounding us with love. And please forgive me for all my shortcomings, and I'll forgive you. So we close, returning again to John Casey's words. This time in the last letter he wrote to the Warren Muslim community. For even in his last days, John was teaching us. As he taught us how to live, he taught us how to die. I'm going to try to do this. In John's words, I'm very sad that I'll only have a few days left to hug my sweetheart, to sit in the sun and watch the world go by. Very sad that I'll not grow a garden again, or work on class notes, or even be in class again. I'm fully engaging this sadness, and if you're sad too, I hope you're fully into it as well. Our lives are experiences to be fully lived. However, this life of experience rests on an illusion of separation. Separation is a good thing in experience. Feeling separated from friends prompts us to seek new friends. Loss of a lover prompts looking for a new love. And separation from success prompts renewed effort. Sorrow and joy are Siamese twins joined at the separation. But in reality, there is no separation. There is only is. Existence. One stuff. Brahman, Yahweh, God, Tao, Wakantanka. These are just names, and as such, they already imply separation. Words and thinking require distinctions, so you cannot think your way out of thinking and so out of separation. You cannot know the Tao, but you can be it. Years ago, I began running on dogwood in the pitch dark of a moonless pre-dawn and got a surprise. Darkness has no edges, no limits, and to be in it is to be it, not part of it, not moving through it, to be it. When you run clothed in the rain, you feel the wet, but naked, you are the wet. Naked in the snow, you are the snow. Naked in the wind, and you are the wind. So I ran across the forests and fields, naked in the dark, and experienced being. When I fell and re-entered the world of separate experience, I started over and over the years, occasionally became the Tao, pure is for long periods. I believe I'm prepared to be a one-timer, going straight to is. In just a few weeks, you will be in the experience of separation from the experiential me, and I will just be, except there will be no separate I, just being. I do not suggest that you run naked on dogwood, although it might make for an interesting experiential independent study. But I hope you fully experience those occasions when while painting you become the painting. Ride your bike in the zone, play music and become the music. These can provide glimpses of being without separation. So when it is your time, you can be. I'm going home soon to be supported while I sit in the sun. Come to my house and sit with me. I may not be up for talking, but just holding hands will be better anyway. Casey. And so the time has come for us to go from this place, and as you go knowing this. We've been lucky to learn from a great teacher. So honor that. Go out and make the world a better place. Go in peace.